Welcome to Art of the Bay Sessions. Before we get the interview started, make sure to hit that subscribe button to catch future episodes. Thanks again and enjoy the interview.
And welcome back, everybody. And we have the amazing Adi Nyakua. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this interview with us. But I guess before we get started, I definitely wanted to congratulate you on recently releasing your Botan tarot deck, which is amazing and just looks amazing from everything that I've seen so far.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's been a bit of a wild ride, and I don't know if I've fully felt the gravity of the situation.
Right.
Now that I finished all the shipment and stuff.
Yeah. No, I saw your Instagram stories and posts, and yeah, it just seemed like a very overwhelming task, but I'm very glad and happy for you to complete that.
Me too.
Awesome. So I wanted to kind of start off with, I usually ask this question second, but I actually wanted to try it the other way around for this interview. For folks in this case who are starting to get familiar with your work, could you just give us like a brief timeline of your art career so far?
Yeah, happy to. So I've been doing art my entire life. I was very much that artistic kid in class. And I did go to school for studio art, which was kind of just the broad painting and ceramics and things like that. But I graduated in 2010 in the middle of the recession. Wow. When I graduated, it was simply a matter of, can I get a job with health insurance?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I ended up getting a job full-time in retail. So I was a manager with Abercrombie and Fitch, and which was like not even my style at the time, but it's what I got through. And worked in retail for about 2 years, which completely drained me. At those who have worked in the service industry know you never know what your schedule is week to week. You have to work weekends, you have to work holidays. So then it wasn't until I got a job as a receptionist for a larger company that I finally got some schedule stability, which allowed me to reclaim some of my time and energy. And I think it took about 5 years after I had graduated before I picked up a pencil and started drawing again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it started with just challenging myself for a New Year's resolution to doodle one thing every day. It did not have to be a big masterpiece. It didn't have to be a well thought out sketch. It just had to be something. And it was an important exercise for me to build that creative momentum and inertia of just moving forward. And that quickly blossomed into, doing more commissions, doing watercolors, doing my first Kickstarter, tabling at Silicon Valley Comic-Con, doing art walks. So it kind of blew up very quickly from there.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I can definitely relate to that, where when I was in art school, I had been working part-time at a paint store. And it's kind of the same schedule where you go in there and you think it's going to be X amount of hours, but then you get swamped and then your schedule kind of goes out the window and then you're exhausted from the day. So like creativity wise, you're kind of drained as well to do after work. So I can definitely relate to like those pain points.
Yeah. I think when I was in retail, I must have been working, I think I was working 13-hour days.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't getting home until like 3 a.m.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. And, the job itself was very physically taxing. We had to be on our feet the whole time and just walking the store. And so, yeah, it really just left me drained. And, I often refer to that time of my life as my 5-year art drought, because there was nothing left in me to create. It was also a really miserable time. It really taught me that creating and making art for me is a lot like breathing. And if I don't make it, it's like holding my breath. And like that air is getting stale in your lungs, and making art is what feels like exhaling and taking a fresh breath for me.
Right. No, that totally makes sense. And I think that kind of leads me into my first question, where I guess either before that or even during your time throughout those 5 years, were there any art influences, or I guess in general, like any art influences that you grew up on that kind of started giving you that inspiration to get back into arts?
Yeah. So I think the most apparent one when people look at my artwork is Studio Ghibli
Mhm.
and Miyazaki movies. I definitely grew up on those as a kid.
Right.
But also it's very common in Japanese folklore for animals to take on like humanistic storylines.
Mhm.
And so that's where the inspiration for a lot of my animal portraits came from, was this
Ah,
idea that like a cat could own a whiskey bar and a dog could be a barista.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but it was while I was in school and actually studying in Japan that I really was influenced by Japanese fashion illustrators. There was actually a point in time in high school where I thought I wanted to do fashion design,
Oh, nice.
and then quickly realized that it was actually fashion illustration that I wanted to do. There's an artist, late artist, Miyuki Morimoto, which she does these really beautiful fashion illustrations with just the ink and brush.
Oh, wow.
Current artist, Olgushi, who also does these just really stunning sort of like Vogue portraits in
Right.
ink, the traditional ink. I guess the other influence that I picked up while I was out there was Art Nouveau.
Mhm.
A lot of people also see that influence in my work as well. So I think I just always carried those in my heart, even
Right.
through my art drought. And then once I came back into art, those sort of naturally took shape in my work.
That's amazing. Would any of those artists have made anything that has kind of crossed over into American territory, or was it more in Japan?
I know that Miyuki Morimoto, her stuff was pretty small scale before she
Mhm.
passed away, and
Oh,
then Oguchi has done a lot of commercial work, but I think it's really only in Asia that
oh,
that their work has been seen. And then
mm,
for Art Nouveau, Alphonse Mucha is a big influence for me, which a lot of people don't recognize the name, but when you see the work, you go, "Oh, I've definitely seen
right.
that." So certainly one of those artists from the late 1800s,
Right, right.
before the Roaring Twenties, that people, when they definitely have seen it
Yeah,
and they would recognize it for sure.
yeah. No, I think that's always the amazing part. Whenever, yeah, I do ask people like what their inspirations were, and it's always one of those things where I may not be familiar with the name or anything, but yeah, once I actually start seeing certain of their famous pieces or just like their style of work, then I'm like, oh yeah, I've definitely seen that before.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, like, did you want to give us more of a kind of like a brief breakdown of, or I guess you can go into the details as well of like how you went about doing your Botan tarot deck? Like, what was the inspiration behind it, and like how did it kind of like the process go
Sure.
throughout the entire thing?
Yeah. So it actually started, let's see, 2017. I kind of got back into art in 2015. So by 2017, things were starting to take off a bit.
Hmm.
And I was really at this crossroads with my life where I was trying to figure out, is this the path that I want to take?
Hmm.
If I don't do it now, when am I going to regret not giving art more of my energy and time? At that point, I was doing a lot of these very small watercolors that had rounded corners. And that's just because that was the paper that I had. And I didn't think much of it, but everyone always asked me, are these meant to be tarot cards?
Oh,
And at the time I kind of thought, oh, I don't really know anything about tarot. So no. But that summer, a friend of mine was visiting and she said, well, I do tarot readings. Why don't I do one for you?
mhm.
And she did a reading for me. She walked me through the deck that she has. And it suddenly made so much sense to me. This is what tarot is. This whole time I had so many like misunderstandings about it. That just left such an impression on me.
Right.
But it wasn't until several months later that, 2017 being kind of a wild time for American history,
Yeah.
I just remember there being a lot of stuff in the news that was especially heavy. And I just remembered thinking, I need something I need to make something that inspires hope for me and represents that light. And so I ended up sketching and painting the sun, the moon, and the star, which are three like very recognizable tarot cards.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, I really just started painting them when I felt like I needed them. So I felt like I needed temperance, so I painted temperance. I felt like I needed strength, so I painted strength. And about halfway through that, people started asking me, "Is this going to be available for purchase?
Right.
Are you actually making a deck?" So I did a version of the deck that's called a majors only deck. So tarot decks have two parts: the major and the minor arcana.
Right.
The major arcana is 22 cards. So I painted the first 22.
Oh, okay.
Launched that on Kickstarter with a very, very humble goal because I truly thought nobody's going to want this. This is such a niche, such a niche thing. But that Kickstarter, I think I ended up doing over 500% of my goal.
Yeah.
And, was able to produce the majors only version of the deck.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people, of course, then started asking, where are the minors? Are you going to do them? Right. Which is another 56.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It took me 4 months to do 22.
Yeah.
So I kept saying, I'm not doing a minor arcana. I'm exhausted from this.
Right.
There's so much creative fatigue and I want to do something else. I want to explore something else. So no, there's not going to be a minor arcana. And then I think it was beginning of last year, I ended up finding the book of Japanese children's stories that my grandmother used to read to me.
Oh, nice.
And was flipping through it. It's beautifully illustrated in watercolor. And so it's no wonder that I found my way to watercolor as an adult.
Right.
I remember just like flipping through the stories, and it inspired me to just draw these characters that ended up being part of the minor arcana. And from there, I just compiled all of it and took pretty much all of 2019 to paint all 56 cards.
Oh, wow.
And then at the beginning of this year, launched it on Kickstarter as a complete deck. And this time did over 800% of my goal.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We hit our goal within the first 4 hours of launching, which I hit launch at like 11:30 at night and went to bed.
Yeah.
Like, I just need to sleep. And then woke up to seeing, just the email notifications of like, you got your first backer, you hit your goal, you hit 200% of your goal. And it was, what is happening? I think it broke.
Oh man.
So yeah, the success was everything that I could have dreamed of. It also allowed me to make 2 different colors of the deck, which I never would have thought that I could do. So yeah. And of course, with 2020 being the year that everything goes wrong, my manufacturing was delayed. There was just a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
And but thankfully, the company that I worked with to manufacture the deck, they were really smart, really safe. So I did manage to get everything and ship everything really only like 2 weeks after my initial like target date. I said it would be done by July, and I got everything out by August 15th. So
no,
not too bad.
That's pretty much on target, I would say.
Yeah. I'm very type A, so I like to I'm the kind of person who thinks if you're not early, you're late.
Right.
So the fact that I couldn't even do it on time was very much like bothering me, but people were very patient, which I appreciated.
No, I think you and I share the same kind of style, because I'm the same way, where if someone says show up at 12, I'll be there at 11:45, just to, like, or 11:45 a.m. just to make sure, like.
Absolutely. And I will sit in my car outside and wait, just so there's no pressure, but I will be there 15 minutes early.
Right, exactly. So I guess maybe tell us a little bit more about 2019, where kind of how did you go about distributing the work itself, where at that point, you kind of had like a number to kind of go after, and how did you go about splitting the work? Where did you mix it up in between doing other projects or other commissions, just to kind of get you in a habit where it didn't seem like work, where it did feel like still like the passion project that you wanted to go after?
Yeah, so I started with, in the Minor Arcana, there's 4 suites that they kind of are like actual playing cards. So there's, at least in my deck, there's swords, wands, coins, and cups. In some decks, sometimes coins are called pentacles.
Oh, okay.
So, and in each of those, there's a page, knight, queen, and king. So very similar to, it's very similar to actual playing cards.
Right.
So you have the ace through 10, and then page, knight, queen, king. And all of the pages, knights, queens, and kings, I based off of the characters or the folklore that I grew up with. For example, each of the knights in all 4 of the sort of families that I created, each of the knights are actually the 4 main characters from the Momotaro legend, which is Peach Boy. So you have Momotaro himself, and then the dog, the monkey, and the pheasant.
Oh, okay.
So I did all of those characters first, and that's 16. And once I finished those 16, I had already had in mind sort of the common themes and color stories that I wanted for each grouping.
Oh, okay.
So I kind of just gave myself a target of, okay, now I need to paint the ace through 10 of the swords, and I have all of August to do it. The aces through 10s, I utilized a lot more, just like a simpler design, and also incorporating aspects of negative space. So they're not the like extremely detailed like basically original characters that I was coming up with for the other 16. And I essentially told myself, as long as I can finish each group within a month, I will be on track. And I think I ended up falling behind a little bit, only because of the holidays and not taking into account, like, oh, that's right, I have to travel for Thanksgiving, and oh, that's right, there's all these holiday events that I said I would sign up for. So
yeah. I think that's interesting. My friend recently had said something similar, where she forgets to put aside those kind of events as well, like birthday parties or just like anything in your personal life, that sometimes you don't factor those in. Of course, then there's always the wild card incidents, where if people get sick or if you get sick too, then that kind of puts your schedule a little bit. So it's kind of like you have to think of some buffer days, or in your case, probably some buffer weeks, to just make sure that everything goes according to plan. But even then, like that's good that like you've stayed within like a target, and distributed your work in like a monthly capacity, which is a good goal to go after.
Yeah, I'm very much the kind of person who believes in breaking up your to-do list. So, I have my little bullet journal planner, and I constantly am reevaluating, like, okay, I have way too much going on Monday. So I'm going to reassign this to Wednesday, where I feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah.
So that part was easy for me, the organizing.
That's awesome. Yeah. I tend to do that same thing but I have my things all over the place, where it's either on notepads or on like a Trello board. So it's like a weird mix of like, I keep some still in like physical aspects where I write it down, and sometimes I put it digitally. And as long as like somehow I keep it organized, and like that's all that matters at that point.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I have to laugh because there's, I think there's this misconception that all artists are disorganized and messy and scatterbrained. And I think that really doesn't cover the large portion of us that have this extreme anxiety over staying organized and staying on track. And writing everything down and keeping everything exactly where it's supposed to be to the best of our ability.
Yeah, no, I really have an appreciation for artists that way too, and I think we need like a term to brand ourselves that way. I don't know what it is, but we definitely try to come up with one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to what you said earlier about kind of like the watercolor being like the thing that always kind of drew you in and inspired you. Were there any moments that while you were kind of trying to develop your own art style, did you have a period where you did try to do different mediums, like either like anime or abstract or even like 3D work, just to kind of just see if any of those different art styles kind of called out to you, or was it more that you kind of just stuck with watercolor and your distinct style?
It's really funny that you ask that, because I mentioned that I studied art in school, and they actually didn't have watercolor at my school. And so I'm self-taught in watercolor, but because I studied Japanese, I knew how to do ink painting. And the art classes that I had to take in order to achieve my degree included, a lot of acrylic painting. The advanced painting classes, they were pretty much like, you just do your own thing and make sure you finish 3 paintings by the end of the quarter. But there was no formal, instruction for watercolor.
Oh, okay.
And it's funny you mentioned anime, because I feel like I still draw anime, maybe not as blatantly as I did in my like middle school notebooks when I was very much in that phase. I'm still in that phase, of course. But I did have to do ceramics. I did have to do, I think I had one Photoshop class on a version of Photoshop that was way too old. The funny part about coming back to watercolor was that I did it out of spite the first time.
Oh, wow.
Because I was painting, my acrylic paintings were all these like ladies with flowers. And because I had just come back from Japan, I had learned about something called Hana Kotoba, which is flower language, where they use flowers to symbolize the things that they can't say. Japanese is very much about the unspoken as it is the spoken.
Right.
And during a critique, a professor called my work Hawaiian kitschy.
Oh.
And he was just like, I don't like this. It's too pretty. It's too soft. He was very much into like the very like moody, dark, grungy paintings that my peers were making. And he was not about my like lovely little flower paintings over here.
Right.
And I just remember being so angry when I got back to my dorm that I pulled out my inks and I had this like old watercolor set. And I was trying to emulate the fashion illustrations that I had seen in Japan. But I was painting these ladies that I thought were like these cool, like model / assassins.
Yeah.
And in my head, I was like, I'll show you soft and pretty. These are my little fashion assassins. And they go out and they will take care of any mean critiques that you have to say about my work.
Right.
And when it came down to a second critique, I brought those. But I didn't say what they were for.
Yeah.
And my professor loved them. He's just like, this is so cool. And I love the energy behind this. Wow. And I'm just sitting here like, yeah, I am. I thought I would experiment a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think what kept drawing me back to watercolor was that it is a medium that you have to work quickly with in a way. But then you also have to sit and wait.
Yeah.
You can't just like keep working it. You have to let it dry at some point.
Yeah.
Plus, I keep mentioning I'm very type A and very organized.
Mm-hmm.
And with watercolors, sometimes it does what it does.
Right.
And you don't have control, and you just have to let it be. The paint goes where it wants to go.
Yeah.
And it's a very good exercise for me, I think, just letting it be.
I think in many ways, I think that's why a lot of people do love watercolor, just because in a weird way, it's kind of symbolizing life in general, because there are moments where, you kind of just have to let it do its own thing. And then there's moments where you kind of have to speed up the process just because, based on the time that you have. So I think that's amazing that you can kind of see that aspect and kind of adapt with it. And I find it funny with the whole spite part of it, because when I was in arts or AP art in high school, there was a mix of classmates there, obviously, that some were in the same ballpark as us, where like we were super on time and everything, and there would be some of the other kids that just kind of did stuff at the last minute, but they would produce really amazing work. And then when my art teacher at the time, she would ask them, like, how did you how did you pull it off? Because I know, like, you didn't spend that much time on it, but it just looks amazing. And then
call them out.
Yeah. So like they literally pulled it out from either the same kind of inspiration, like either something out of spite or something that just drew an emotion out of them to really just being able to express it on paper. And I think that's sometimes like does produce like the best work, where it doesn't necessarily have to be anything like extremely detailed or anything that you spend countless hours and hours on. But as long as the emotion and like the message is there, that's like what the form of art really is at that point.
Yeah.
Kind of going into the same question, was there ever any projects that either in school or just on your own personal time that you did kind of like put a lot of time and effort and it may have not gotten the same level of success, versus something that you just spent like a doodle or like an hour on, and like all of a sudden that's the one that ended up being more successful?
The series of like flower ladies that I was doing, I think what was really hard for me was that was, my first year coming back from studying abroad, and I couldn't bring my acrylics with me to Japan, or my easel. So I wasn't creating acrylic paintings while I was abroad. And I was trying to sketch for sure, but I couldn't do anything large scale.
Yeah.
And when I came back, I felt very behind with my peers, because my peers had a whole extra year of just painting. And they were doing these enormous, like 10-foot tall acrylic, like super textured, it would stay wet for weeks type paintings.
Yeah.
And I was just so intimidated by that. And I was still trying to play catch up with like color theory and stuff like that. So, as precious as I was with those pieces back then, I wouldn't consider them my more successful pieces. Just because it was basically me trying to play catch up and re-teach myself how to art. The like ink paintings that I did out of spite ended up being very popular during my during my senior showcase, just because I think they were so different, and nobody in my year was doing watercolor or ink painting at that point. So I think it was just very different.
Right.
And I also had done, I shy away from self-portraits. It makes me very uncomfortable to paint myself or to paint something that I would admit is me. And my professor towards the end of the year, when I only needed one more painting for my show, he said, well, you should do a self-portrait. And that one I ended up doing, like, I think it was 6 feet wide, and like my personhood is off on 1/3, and the rest of it is just sort of like a gray gradient.
Right.
But I based it off of a photo where I was wearing this very detailed scarf, and I went to town on the detail of that scarf in my painting. So it's also no surprise that I like to get into the really tiny details in my artwork today, because there's something meditative about that, I think, when you can find a whole little world in, all of 5 by 5 inches.
Yeah.
And that piece also ended up being very popular. And I ended up getting a lot of like good feedback on that. But for me, it was like, it's my face though. I don't feel comfortable having to stare at my own face and then paint my own face.
Yeah. I'm very similar, where I think same thing in high school and in college, I would have to do self-portraits or just something involving you. And I think it was always the same case where it was always hard to kind of like put myself in that state. And even now, it's the same thing where if I need to do like a biography about myself, or even like a summary promoting myself on either social media or on my website, then I usually have someone else do it, just because I can't that thing of like being able to come up with something for myself, which I don't know. I definitely understand it from that point of view when it comes to like just that own self-evaluation of like describing yourself either in words or in this case through a self-portrait.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that, because I really feel, I can only go off of my own experience, but this is something that I think I've heard a lot of fellow creatives say, especially those who have done more formal school for art. They don't teach you how to do that. They teach you how to do self-expression, but not that self-evaluation.
Right.
They don't teach you how to confidently say, this is my name, this is my piece, this is what it means. Which, as you get tossed into the world at age 22 and you have this degree in art, you're not prepared at all to actually run the business of your art. How to write an artist's resume, essentially, and how to speak to your own pieces. So that seems to be a common thread for a lot of creatives is we're very uncomfortable having to write our own biographies, and no one ever taught us how to do it.
Right. Yeah. My friend actually mentioned something similar, because we were talking about that, where since he has more of a sports background, it's only something recently with, I think, a lot of different fields, where same thing with him when he was in college, like, of course they prepped him to be the best athlete that he could be, but in the same thing, they didn't give him any kind of insight on like how to manage himself, his career, how to like promote himself. So it's the same thing that I can totally relate to that, where once I got out of college as well, I was just kind of on my own, just trying to figure out everything, not having that business savvy sense to kind of like
how to price your work.
Right.
That's the big one that everyone's like, how do I price my work? And I don't know.
Awesome. So yeah, I guess on more on the personal side, what are some of your hobbies when you aren't creating a year's worth of work, I guess?
It's funny when I saw that question in your email, I was like, what are my hobbies besides that? I do. So I'm very lucky that my family is one of the arts. So I grew up, dancing and singing. So, even though I'm not doing any of that formally right now, I love just doing it for fun on the side.
Right.
I still can't learn any of the TikTok dances, unfortunately. I'm just like, I can't. But I do enjoy just, singing, dancing. I wouldn't consider myself a gamer, but I do enjoy video games just on a very, very light level. I think I haven't touched my Animal Crossing in a few weeks since I got so sucked in with my Kickstarter. So hopefully my island isn't covered in weeds right now.
Yeah.
I also just really like watching like anime, movies, comic books, just kind of diving into those fantasy realms that I can draw further inspiration from.
Nice. Any favorite movies? It doesn't even have to be related to like any art inspiration, but just like any favorite movies that you can always put on just if you either just want to relax or just have something in the background.
It's always a Ghibli movie. I've seen all of them maybe 1,000 times, but I think there's such a wonderful way of storytelling in those movies that even if you're not like totally paying attention to them, you can still get the feeling from the narrative. There's also such a great like ASMR quality to the sound effects that they use in those films. Like when they're chopping cabbage, it's so delightful for me because it just reminds me of like being with my family and cooking together and stuff. So
it's funny you say that because one of my favorite originals, I guess it's not really an original, but they have it on Disney Plus. I don't know if you've seen Zenimation.
No.
So it's interesting because it's technically not anything new, but it's the way they reproduce it, where it's scenes from various Disney and Pixar movies. But what they do is that they keep all the scenery stuff. So like, just picture all the scenery from Zootopia or from Big Hero 6. And what they do is that they remove all the dialogue for those scenes. So it's strictly just like the sound effects and everything. And it's just like a compilation of
That's so
all
cool.
Yeah, it's just a compilation of all those scenes. And I think they're only like 7 or 8 minutes. But in my mind, I'm like, Disney, you should just make like a full series on this because I would totally just like put it on the background because you're just and it kind of gives you a more of an appreciation for the animation because you're not distracted by, the dialogue or the story, that you can just focus on like the visuals and really enjoy the audio parts. And like as soon as you said that, I was like, oh, Zenimation is totally like one of my favorite things.
I will have to check that out because I love listening to ambient noises. I end up listening to a lot of like cafe sound playlists while I'm painting, just so I feel like I'm actually out in the real world among other people.
Right.
But I found that there are channels on YouTube where these they're basically sound engineers. They will craft an entire imaginary space with sound effects, and the title will be The Library at Hogwarts, and it will be the sounds of people, flipping through pages, and they will pick these fantasy locations and engineer these sound environments based on those locations. So they're just so cool, and I think that sound engineering is such a special craft, especially for those who have to do the special effects. If you ever watch videos where someone has to like make up like the sound of a horse running,
right,
to sync with the video, it's just so cool to me.
I think they're called Foley guys.
I think so. Foley artists, or Foley artists. I mean, they're artists in my eyes. So.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think they definitely. I think those are some of the categories that I always want to see at like the Oscars or the Emmys or anything. It's just more credit to like sound engineers in those fields. Yeah. Cool. So another aspect I definitely wanted to cover is your amazing jacket art. Where, I know I definitely remember purchasing one of your prints at the Silicon Valley a couple of years ago, but I think I also remember seeing your jackets pop up more often on social media. And to me anyway, it seemed like such an original thing that you would think it's something that people have already covered over and over, seeing like how long, of course, we've had jackets and art. But it's just a thing that, it's kind of like a rare hidden gem nowadays because, most of the focus has shifted over to digital art that we don't have as many tangible art items. So how did you start coming up with those? What was the inspiration to kind of to try them out and then eventually just start doing commission work for them?
It started with I had purchased a denim jacket from a brand called Wuji, and Edward, the guy who runs Wuji, is a really cool guy. He's got all this really cool gear on there. But the jacket is a denim jacket, and on the back, in what kind of looks like large marker font, it says "Make Art." And I bought that at the end of 2018 with absolutely the intention of it being my like 2019 slogan, "Make Art." Right. And I definitely wanted to customize it. I didn't know if I wanted to do like just cover it in enamel pins. I have so many enamel pins.
Yeah.
At some point, I think what I ended up doing was taking a photo of it with my iPad and then in Procreate drawing around it to kind of draft a design with, flowers and a crow. And I started looking up, okay, how do I actually make this happen? Right. And I mean, thank goodness for YouTube. You can learn anything on YouTube. But I figured out how to mix the right paints in order to create this jacket. And it would be sort of my one hero piece that I could wear when I'm at events. Mm-hmm. It's like my super treasured item. And it was only for me. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to worry about somebody else liking it.
Right.
But it was just so much fun. It's so much fun to paint on jackets. Mm-hmm. And it's so much fun to like make one and then give it to the person and then they try it on. And just thinking that someone is out there walking around with my artwork on their shoulders, it's just a really satisfying feeling. So over time, I kind of like learned new techniques, found some better ways to do things mm-hmm. that don't work, and also better ways to run my commissions for them. Right. I definitely made the mistake of just doing the like, if you want a jacket, let me paint it. And it ended in, a lot of very, very like not so exciting ideas or very complicated ideas, but the person would have like $50 to spend. And I'm like, that's not gonna, my materials cost more than $50. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, it also taught me a little bit about refining my commission process as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's always interesting because there's certain things, especially when you jump into like a new medium or project that you're not as familiar with, that you do kind of have to find out like the kinks and like what work and what doesn't work. And I think that's always the part that I enjoy the most is the process of art, where you do figure out those aspects of like figuring out in that case that, okay, this is what I want to put out there, but now like I know I have to put either some restrictions here and there, but it's not taking away from the experience of me enjoying creating the art. This is more me putting some kind of structure that will make sense for both you and your client at that point. And
right.
That's a lot of respect.
Yeah. I think as new artists, we really struggle with setting those boundaries and mm-hmm. structures for ourselves and not realizing that they have a huge impact on our own happiness for creating. Yeah. It's definitely a lesson that you just kind of have to learn by doing. It's not something that, you start out as an artist and you automatically know what works for you and what doesn't work for you. You just have to figure it out. And it's changing too, constantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I going back to what you said with YouTube, like to me, I'm the same way, where I've learned kind of the same way that you've mentioned, where just organizing everything. I've learned to store information versus keeping it in my head, which mm-hmm. A lot of it has to be because of YouTube and all these other digital references that I can kind of go to if I don't remember exactly. And it sometimes in our case too, where it may not be something that you necessarily are doing over and over again. So there's not a real reason to like hammer it in your head.
Yeah.
So it is good to kind of go back and kind of have these reference points like YouTube to kind of give you a guide. But then that's all it really is just a guide. And then you kind of make up what fits best for you and the project mm-hmm. that you're working on at that point.
Yeah, there's still, as much as I was able to pick up from YouTube, I think a lot of it was me just kind of trial and error, mm-hmm. figuring it out on my own, just based on, my own knowledge, my own technique, my own supplies that I had on hand.
Yeah.
Figuring out okay, these brushes work better than these. And
right.
wow, I should definitely rinse the brushes immediately after using this instead of letting it sit even for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So
that's always the thing to learn. It's like, oh yeah, brushes. They need their own self-care as well.
Yes, absolutely. My poor brushes take such a beating sometimes. They need like their own like 10-step skincare routine.
Yeah. They need a break sometimes, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So I definitely wanted to be respectful of your time. So I just had one more question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout everything, and of course, I really have enjoyed this conversation with all the projects that you have mentioned. Has there been a few select that have been your favorite projects to work on? And if so, have they been either solo projects or have there been any collaborative efforts as well?
The most obvious one that comes to mind is my Botan Tarot.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, definitely a solo project, unless you consider like my ancestors' influence as collaboration.
Right.
So, that one is a huge one for me. I've never done a project of that size before.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also been such an undertaking as far as like running a business.
Mm-hmm.
I thankfully picked up a lot of skill in communication and management through my,
non-art
jobs.
Right.
So I wasn't necessarily daunted by that, but it was just a lot of work.
Right.
And then as far as collaborative projects go, it's hard because I feel like I don't get an opportunity to collaborate a lot, especially now when we don't get to see people or like share ideas other than through email.
Mm-hmm.
One of the jackets that I did do was it was a commission, but I would consider it a collaboration because the friend who commissioned it for me, she was actually the same friend who did the tarot reading for me.
Oh, nice.
Who inspired the tarot deck.
Right.
But so she's Filipino and she moved from California to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And she wanted this jacket that represented her magic and her heritage. And so we were constantly bouncing ideas off of each other, like, oh, okay, what if the jacket had this incorporation of the Golden Gate Bridge because you're from the Bay, but we also want the sun from the Philippine flag on there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a lot of like, mixing ideas together, and the energy was so good there. So even though it was hers and she gets that jacket, I would consider that project a collaboration just because most of the ideas were hers.
Yeah. Oh,
I was just executing it.
Yeah. She was the director and you were just kind of like the actor acting everything out.
Right.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. I think that's always the rewarding part when you actually do have either a client or in this case, like a friend that you can draw that inspiration from. My other friend and I had come up with the term the creative buddy. And I think that's always a fun case where a lot of the times maybe your spouse or family members don't understand where you're coming from a creative standpoint. Mm-hmm. That way you have someone that has like a creative vision, then that's where the best kind of collaborations and ideas spark from, just because you're both in that mindset that your goal is to create something, and like what it ends up being, it doesn't really matter what it is as long as like the two of you have put such a team effort into creating the vision that you want it to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a different vibe when you're collaborating with another creative versus someone who is not from that school of thought.
Right. Totally agree. Well, thank you so much for your time. I wanted to see if you had anything else that you wanted to plug or mention before we head off.
Yeah. So this is the number one question that I've been getting since I did the Kickstarter is if the Botan Tarot is available for purchase. I do have extra stock, like the boxes behind me. That's like not even half of it.
Right.
So I do have tarot decks available for purchase. The next thing that I'm really excited to get back into is jackets. So trying to source some secondhand jackets wherever I can during this quarantine season.
Right.
So I'm definitely looking forward to doing some more jacket projects.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to see what you come up with next, and definitely congrats again on your successful Kickstarter. And yeah,
thank you so much.
From everything I've seen, it just looks amazing. So I'm glad that you've gotten a great reception to it.
Thank you. It is a piece of my heart. So I'm just happy that people are being gentle with it.
That's all we can ask for as artists.
Right. Like, it's a little piece of me. Please be nice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, and hopefully you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. So
yeah, it was fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Nando. Bye.
Take care.
If you enjoyed the interview, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching. Take care.